Security guards shoved Amari face first against the marble counter, twisting his arm behind his back while customers watched, some filming, most laughing. His only crime? Trying to cash his paycheck. His ID was real. His name was real. But in their eyes, none of that mattered. Because a young black man with a big check must be a thief, right? They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Amari Benson adjusted the cuffs of his navy blazer as he pushed open the towering glass doors of State Trust Bank in downtown Houston. The lobby gleamed, marble floors, brushed steel counters, massive modern chandeliers. Business people in sharp suits chatted in low voices, tapping away on their phones. Amari moved confidently to the front desk, a certified check tucked carefully into his leather portfolio. This wasn't his first time handling big money. As the youngest senior project manager at a national tech firm, he was used to contracts, wire transfers, and million-dollar transactions. He smiled politely at the teller, a middle-aged woman with tight blonde curls and sharp, suspicious eyes. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm here to cash a check issued by your corporate division," he said, sliding the check and his Texas ID across the counter. The woman glanced at the check, then at him, her nostrils flaring slightly. The check was for $94,217.54. Amari saw the change in her instantly. The way her shoulders tensed. The way her mouth pinched. "I'll need to get a manager," she said curtly, pushing away from the counter without another word. Amari exhaled slowly, adjusting his tie. He knew that look. Had seen it too many times. Around him, the lobby continued humming, white noise of transactions and small talk. But now, eyes were beginning to turn toward him. Noticing him. Marking him. The manager arrived 2 minutes later, a tall, square-jawed man in a too-tight suit and a shiny name tag that read Chad E., branch manager. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. He stared at Amari like he was an equation he couldn't solve. "This your check?" Chad asked bluntly, snatching it off the counter. Amari nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. Issued this morning by Alliance Tech Solutions." Chad's eyes darted between the check and Amari's face. His jaw flexed once. Twice. "Wait here," he barked, disappearing through a door behind the counter. Minutes dragged by. 5, 10, 15. Customers came and went. Tellers whispered to each other, their glances slicing across the room. Amari remained still, hands folded over his portfolio, breathing slow and steady. At 17 minutes, 2 uniformed security guards approached. Big. Armed. Frowning. "Sir," one of them said, voice low and hard, "we're going to need you to step away from the counter." Amari frowned slightly, confused. "Excuse me? I'm here on legitimate business." The second guard stepped closer, crowding his space. "Step away. Now." Behind them, Chad reappeared, his face flushed, his fist clenched. "Fake check. Possible fraud," he said loudly, for everyone to hear. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Amari's heart hammered once in his chest, but he didn't move. "That check is legitimate. Call the issuing company and verify it," he said, voice even. But they weren't listening. Rough hands grabbed his arm. The portfolio fell to the floor, paper scattering. Someone laughed. A phone camera clicked nearby, and as they forced Amari's face down against the cold marble, twisting his arms behind his back, one thought cut through the rising panic. Not again. The marble countertop pressed painfully into Amari's cheek as one of the guards cinched a plastic zip tie around his wrists, tight enough to cut off circulation. Across the lobby, customers stopped pretending not to watch. Some pointed. A few chuckled. Another one caught. Someone muttered under their breath. Amari lifted his head slightly, forcing his voice to stay level. "Check the issuing company. Call Alliance Tech. I have nothing to hide." Chad, the branch manager, didn't even glance at him. He addressed the guards instead, loud enough for the room to hear. "Detain him until police arrive. We're pressing charges for attempted fraud." Amari's chest tightened. Pressing charges. Over a real check. He knew how fast things could spiral once that phrase entered the air. The system didn't ask questions later. It slammed doors first and sorted out the ruins afterward. The guards marched him toward a small security room off the lobby. As they shoved him forward, he caught sight of his scattered papers, contracts, ID copies, even a notarized letter from his employer, left lying on the floor like trash. No one bothered to pick them up. Inside the windowless room, the guards set him roughly in a plastic chair bolted to the floor. A heavy desk stood in one corner, a small security camera blinking red in the ceiling. Amari shifted uncomfortably, feeling the zip ties digging deeper into his skin. One of the guards, the older one, with a faded scar along his jawline, leaned in close. "You people are real bold nowadays," he sneered. "Think you can just walk into any place and take what you want?" Amari said nothing. He'd learned the hard way that anything he said would only be twisted against him later. Minutes dragged into an hour. No phone call. No lawyer. No one from the bank came to speak to him. Through the thin door, he could hear muffled voices. Laughter. Jokes at his expense. The humiliation burned hotter than any rage. He was invisible again, an object to be processed, punished, discarded. His mind raced. He thought about his parents, the warnings they gave him growing up. Smile. Be polite. Stay calm. It won't save you, but it might keep you alive. He thought about the interns he mentored at his company, the ones who looked up to him because they thought success could shield them. He thought about the fact that no degree, no salary, no tailored suit would ever make him safe in their eyes. Outside the door, footsteps pounded. The guards straightened suddenly, exchanging nervous glances. A sharp, commanding voice sliced through the hallway. "Where's the detained customer?" "Now." Another voice, lower but unmistakably serious, responded. "We need full verification before this goes any further. Get me the branch manager immediately." Amari frowned. Something had shifted. The air smelled different, sharper, electric. The guards hesitated. For the first time all afternoon, they looked uncertain. Amari sat perfectly still, pulse hammering, waiting, because whatever was coming, it wasn't part of their plan. The door slammed open so hard it rattled on its hinges. A tall woman in a dark gray business suit stepped inside, her badge flashing briefly from her belt. Regina Miles, Regional Compliance Director, State Trust Bank. Her face was carved from stone. No sympathy, no smiles. Her sharp eyes swept the room, landing squarely on Amari, bound to the chair like a captured animal. "Who authorized this detention?" she demanded. The guards hesitated, exchanging a panicked glance. Branch Manager Chad Evans, ma'am," stammered the older one. Regina's lips pressed into a thin line. "Based on what evidence?" Silence. No one moved. Amari stared at her, searching for something, recognition, fairness, anything. But her expression remained unreadable. Regina turned to the camera in the ceiling. "Is this room recording?" The younger guard nodded hesitantly. "Why, yes, ma'am." "Good," Amari thought grimly. At least there would be proof of this humiliation. Regina's voice dropped to a cold, precise register. "You are both instructed to stand down immediately. Remove the restraints. Mr. Benson will not be charged with anything today." The younger guard stepped forward, fumbling with a small cutter to snap the zip ties. Amari winced as blood rushed back into his numbed hands. He flexed his fingers slowly, refusing to look away from the guards' faces as they backed away from him like he was a bomb about to explode. Regina motioned toward the hallway. "Mr. Benson, if you'll come with me." Amari stood carefully, his wrists raw and burning. He followed her out of the room, every step through the lobby burning his pride raw. Customers stared openly now, some with pity, some with discomfort. No apologies came. No one offered a hand. They just watched, as if he were the one who had done something wrong. Regina led him into a private office near the executive suites. It was sterile and cold, decorated with generic prints of city skylines. She gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat." Amari remained standing. Regina hesitated, then placed his check on the desk, pristine, uncreased, untouched. "I verified the issuing company personally. The check is valid." She folded her hands neatly on the desk. "On behalf of State Trust Bank, I apologize for your experience today." Amari stared at her, unmoving. "You apologize," he said slowly, "because you got caught." Regina's face remained blank. "I apologize," she repeated mechanically, "for the inconvenience and emotional distress this incident may have caused." Inconvenience. As if being treated like a criminal, publicly humiliated, and restrained like an animal was just a scheduling conflict. Amari leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, almost gentle. "How many others before me didn't have the power to make you nervous?" Regina didn't answer, because she didn't have to. Amari straightened. "Cash the check," he said. "Full amount. Right now?" Regina nodded stiffly and picked up the phone. Within minutes, a junior banker arrived, trembling slightly, carrying a fat envelope thick with crisp bills. Amari took it, tucking it into his portfolio without counting it. He paused at the door. "You should remember something," he said, his voice low. "I was silent today, but that doesn't mean I'll stay silent tomorrow." Regina finally blinked, the first crack in her armor. And without waiting for a response, Amari walked out, each step measured, each breath sharp. Because today they thought it was over. But for Amari Benson, it was only beginning. The Houston heat slapped Amari in the face as he stepped out of State Trust Bank, but the fire building in his chest had nothing to do with the weather. He didn't go home. He didn't call friends. He didn't even check his phone, though it buzzed relentlessly in his pocket. He just walked, fast, purposeful, weaving through downtown traffic, not trusting himself to stop moving. Because if he stopped, the rage would boil over. By the time he reached the shaded front steps of his office building, his phone had racked up 10 missed calls. All from the same number, Corporate HR, Alliance Tech Solutions. His stomach tightened. He already knew. They were coming for him next. Amari climbed the stairs two at a time and entered the lobby, cool, quiet, sterile. As he crossed to the elevators, he caught the nervous glances from the security desk. Their smiles today were brittle, their eyes skittish. They knew too. Upstairs, the office air was thick with tension. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when he passed. A junior analyst who usually chatted with him at the coffee machine dropped her gaze to the floor. Amari kept walking. When he reached his desk, an email was already waiting. Subject: urgent, mandatory HR meeting at 2 p.m. No explanation. No agenda. But Amari understood the language perfectly. This wasn't a meeting. It was a warning. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then stood and headed straight to the conference room. Inside, 3 people waited. The HR director, a thin man with a twitching knee, the company's general counsel, her mouth drawn into a taut line, and Marcus Hale, the regional vice president who had once shaken Amari's hand with a promise of unlimited opportunity. Marcus stood up when Amari entered. "Amari, good to see you," he said, forcing a thin smile. "Please, sit." Amari remained standing. The HR director cleared his throat awkwardly. "We've been informed there was an incident at State Trust Bank earlier today," he began, voice syrupy. Amari said nothing. "Let them talk. Let them show their hand." The general counsel leaned forward slightly. "Amari, you have to understand. We have important business relationships with State Trust. Large-scale contracts, ongoing negotiations. The bank leadership has expressed concern." Marcus Hale took over, his voice falsely gentle. "We're proud of you, Amari. You've built an incredible career here. We don't want anything to jeopardize that. That's why, for everyone's sake, we're asking you to consider signing a confidentiality agreement." He slid a glossy folder across the table. Amari didn't move. Marcus tapped the folder lightly. "It's standard. You agree not to discuss today's events publicly, in return for a modest compensation package." Amari's mouth twitched into something almost resembling a smile. He opened the folder casually. Inside, a pre-written non-disclosure agreement. And a check. For $25,000. A small price for his silence. A cheap bandage for their bleeding reputation. The general counsel chimed in quickly. "To be clear, Amari, this isn't about guilt. This is about avoiding unnecessary attention for everyone involved." Amari slowly closed the folder. His voice was low, but it carried. "You think my dignity is worth 25 grand? No one answered. He looked each of them in the eye, one by one. "You want me to forget being publicly humiliated. You want me to forget being zip-tied like an animal. You want me to forget that nobody said a word when it happened, but now that your contracts are in danger, you're all very concerned." The HR director shifted uncomfortably. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Amari cut him off. "You're not worried about me. You're worried about your bottom line." He pushed the folder back across the table, untouched. "I'm not for sale." Without another word, Amari turned and walked out, leaving their stunned faces in his wake. He didn't know exactly what came next. He only knew one thing. He wasn't going to be silent. Not this time. Not ever again. Amari stepped into the elevator and leaned his back against the cool metal wall, his fists unclenching slowly as the doors slid shut. Above him, the fluorescent lights buzzed. He closed his eyes, letting the anger harden, not into rage, but into something sharper. Focus. They wanted to corner him into silence. They thought he was isolated. They had no idea who he really was. Because Amari Benson wasn't just a project manager. He was a licensed CPA, a certified financial investigator, skills they had overlooked because of the color of his skin. He had spent years quietly helping nonprofits expose financial corruption, years building private connections with reporters, whistleblower attorneys, and civil rights investigators. He didn't need a protest. He didn't need a megaphone. He had proof, and he knew exactly where to aim it. He walked straight past his desk, grabbed his laptop, and headed for the parking garage without another glance at the HR office. Sitting in the driver's seat of his silver sedan, he booted up his laptop and tapped into a private server. His fingers flew over the keyboard. Step 1. He compiled the full incident timeline. Entry into State Trust Bank. Presentation of legitimate ID and check. Unauthorized detainment without probable cause. Refusal to verify check. Physical restraint and public humiliation. Step 2. He attached high-resolution images of the check, his identification, and the notarized letter from Alliance Tech Solutions. Step 3. He loaded security footage. Because what the bank didn't know, what they never thought to check, was that Amari had quietly recorded the entire interaction on a slim button camera hidden in his lapel. Crystal clear footage. Audio too. Their words, their faces, their hands shoving him, every second captured. Step 4. He drafted 3 targeted complaint packages. 1. To the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for racial discrimination under banking laws. 2. To the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, citing workplace retaliation after discrimination. 3. To the Houston Chronicle's investigative journalism desk, where an old college friend now worked as an editor. Each complaint was backed by unshakable documentation, precise, factual, lethal. No emotion. No accusations. Just the cold, hard truth delivered with a surgeon's precision. Before sending, he paused. He thought about what Marcus Hale had said. Unlimited opportunity. He smiled grimly. Unlimited, until they thought you were dangerous. He clicked send on all 3 packages. Immediately, encrypted confirmations returned. It was done. Now, all he had to do was wait. Across the city, deep in the marble towers where deals were signed behind closed doors, the first tremors would already be starting. In a matter of hours, calls would be made. Lawyers would panic. Boards would meet. And this time, Amari wouldn't be the one sitting silently, begging for dignity. He would be the one holding the sword. It started with a single notification. Amari was sitting in his car, watching the city skyline blur into twilight, when his phone buzzed. Subject, confirmed. CFPB investigation opened. His heart thudded once, hard. Moments later, another alert. Subject, EEOC case number assigned, retaliation and discrimination. Then a third. Houston Chronicle, local bank accused of racial profiling customer, investigation underway. The story was brief, only a few paragraphs, but it carried enough punch to shatter glass. An executive-level black professional was allegedly detained and accused of fraud while attempting to cash a valid paycheck at a downtown branch of State Trust Bank. Sources confirm video evidence is under review. Bank officials have declined comment. Civil rights attorneys say the case could mark a significant turning point in how financial institutions handle minority customers nationwide. Amari's hand tightened around the steering wheel. It was real now. No more whispered apologies behind closed doors. No more folders slid across tables with fake smiles. This was public. He allowed himself a long, slow breath, feeling the knot in his chest loosen slightly. Meanwhile, chaos unfurled behind the walls of State Trust Bank. Emails flooded the branch. Angry customers demanded explanations. Local news vans set up across the street, cameras pointed at the glittering entrance. Inside the executive boardroom, Chad Evans, the branch manager who had accused Amari of fraud, sat sweating through his expensive shirt. The regional compliance director, Regina Miles, stood stiffly against the far wall, her jaw tight. A stern woman from the corporate legal team slammed her palms against the table. Who authorized the detainment without verification? No one answered. They all knew the answer, and no one dared say it aloud. Because now it wasn't about one customer. It was about a pattern. State Trust's internal records, complaints about differential treatment, disproportionate transaction denials, were already being subpoenaed. And the footage? The footage would bury them. Especially the part where Chad, loud and clear, declared. Fake check. Possible fraud. Without calling to verify. Without checking a single fact. A junior compliance officer, no older than 24, sat trembling in the corner, scrolling through his phone. The Houston Chronicle article flashed on the screen. He whispered under his breath. We're screwed. And they were. Because the story wasn't just about state trust anymore. Alliance Tech Solutions, Amari's employer, had been named in the early reports too. Major tech firm pressured black employee into silence after discrimination incident, the follow-up headlines teased. Marcus Hale, the regional vice president, sat in a cold sweat inside a conference call with corporate headquarters. Words like hostile work environment, civil rights violation, and class action exposure bounced across the speakerphone. The lawyers knew. If Amari decided to escalate this further, if he filed a civil suit, it wouldn't just be about the bank. It would crack open every door they had carefully bolted shut, every unreported complaint, every ignored whistleblower, every double standard. And deep down, they knew. There was nothing they could offer him now. No check big enough. No settlement clean enough. Amari Benson was no longer a problem to be managed. He was a storm they couldn't outrun. The first threat was subtle. A plain white envelope slipped under Amari's apartment door late that night. No return address. No markings. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed in bold black letters. You're making a mistake. Think carefully about your future. No signature. No direct accusation. But the message was crystal clear. Amari stared at it for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers, not from fear, but from the volcanic pressure building just beneath his skin. He folded the letter neatly and slid it into a new file labeled Intimidation, Evidence. They were scared. And scared people made sloppy mistakes. An hour later, his phone buzzed again, an unknown number flashing across the screen. He let it go to voicemail. The message was short, distorted by a voice changer. You think anyone's going to hire you after this? You think you're some kind of hero? You're burning your future, boy. Boy. The word hit harder than a punch. Amari played the message twice, memorizing every cadence, every slight pause. Then he archived it with the same precision he used building cases against white-collar criminals. Across the city, corporate boardrooms spun faster. At State Trust, the PR department scrambled to control the wildfire. Fake community initiatives were rushed onto social media. Stock images of smiling black customers were posted under hashtags like #WeStandTogether and #InclusionMatters. But it was too late. The comments exploded with rage. Where was this energy when you zip-tied an innocent man? We see you. We're not forgetting. Justice for Amari. At Alliance Tech Solutions, HR rushed out a bland internal memo. Alliance Tech stands firmly against discrimination in all forms. We support open dialogue and respect among all employees. But inside the office, whispers filled every hallway. People knew. They knew the company had tried to buy Amari's silence. They knew the leadership had panicked, not because injustice occurred, but because someone important had noticed. Meanwhile, Amari moved methodically. He hired a civil rights attorney, a sharp, relentless woman named Carla James, known for dismantling corporate giants one lawsuit at a time. Carla didn't waste words when they met. They're scared because you have something they can't erase, she said, flipping through his file. Proof. Documentation. Public sympathy. She glanced up, her gaze slicing straight through him. They'll come after your job next. Your reputation. Maybe even your safety. Amari nodded, steady. Let them come. Carla smiled thinly, approving. Then let's turn the pressure up. Within 48 hours, Amari's legal team filed formal notices of claim against both State Trust Bank and Alliance Tech Solutions. Not lawsuits yet, but the legal equivalent of a loaded gun on the table. Either settle fully and publicly, admitting wrongdoing, or prepare for a battle that would drag every dirty policy, every hidden email, every buried complaint into the brutal light of a courtroom. The clock was ticking, and this time, Amari controlled the timekeeper. By Monday morning, the dam broke. A leaked memo from inside State Trust Bank hit the internet like a lightning strike. It wasn't just about Amari anymore. The memo revealed a pattern, internal guidelines that encouraged heightened scrutiny of high-value transactions involving non-traditional customers. A veiled phrase. Everyone knew what it meant. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded. Heightened scrutiny equals black customers equals racism. This isn't isolated. It's systemic. #Justice for Amari trending in all major cities. Within hours, national media picked up the story. By noon, major TV anchors were debating it on live broadcasts. Today's revelation about State Trust Bank shows once again how deeply ingrained bias still infects American institutions. Outside State Trust's downtown headquarters, protesters gathered, suits and hoodies, young and old, holding handmade signs. Cashing a check shouldn't cost her dignity. We are not suspects. Amari stood up. So will we. The bank's CEO issued a shaky statement. We are deeply troubled by these revelations and are conducting a thorough internal review. But no one cared. It was too little, too late. Meanwhile, at Alliance Tech Solutions, the walls crumbled even faster. An anonymous whistleblower, one of Amari's former colleagues, released internal emails to a journalist at the Houston Chronicle. The emails showed Marcus Hale, the regional vice president, actively discussing ways to contain the Amari situation by offering an incentive in exchange for a non-disclosure. Plain as day. Proof of corporate retaliation. Alliance Tech's leadership panicked. By mid-afternoon, Marcus Hale was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By the evening news, he was quietly terminated. No severance. No ceremony. Just a cold sentence on a press release. But it didn't stop there. Other employees, mostly Black and Latino, began coming forward, sharing their own stories of mistreatment at Alliance Tech. Amari's stand cracked open a floodgate they hadn't prepared for. A class-action lawsuit began to form, with Carla James coordinating it like a general preparing for war. And Amari? He stayed silent, strategic, patient. While the corporation scrambled, while the media frenzy sharpened, while the public pressure mounted higher than any PR firm could contain, Amari never said a word publicly. Because he understood something deep and dangerous. The more they talked, the more they revealed. The more they panicked, the more they exposed themselves. And every email they sent, every rushed apology, every desperate meeting, was building his case stronger by the hour. By the end of the week, it was clear. No settlement could make this go away. No corporate memo could erase the footage, the documentation, the truth. Amari Benson wasn't just a man who got mistreated at a bank. He had become a symbol of dignity, of resistance, of the power of not staying silent. And the storm he unleashed was now out of their control. The subpoenas came down like hammers. Federal investigators launched full-scale probes into State Trust Bank's corporate practices, not just in Houston, but nationwide. Regional offices across the country were ordered to submit internal emails, customer service logs, transaction denials, everything. Under oath. No negotiations. No redactions. At the same time, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission delivered a scathing preliminary finding against Alliance Tech Solutions. Retaliatory intimidation, racially disparate treatment, and a hostile work environment. It was the death knell no executive spin could silence. Inside State Trust skyscraper headquarters, chaos reigned. The CEO resigned abruptly for personal reasons, a press release full of hollow words trailing behind him. Chad Evans, the branch manager who had humiliated Amari, was fired, effective immediately. Regina Miles, the compliance director who had tried to contain the damage, was placed on indefinite unpaid leave pending further disciplinary review. But the most brutal blow was yet to come. The Department of Justice announced it was considering civil penalties against State Trust Bank under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, penalties that could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors fled. Stock prices plummeted. Clients canceled contracts in waves. By Friday, State Trust Bank's public relations department was leaking like a sinking ship. Internal emails, desperate pleas for loyalty, last-minute diversity initiatives, and pitiful donations to civil rights organizations surfaced and were ruthlessly dissected online. Nobody bought it. Because the footage of Amari, his arms twisted behind his back, his face shoved into a marble counter, was seared into the public consciousness. You can't spin that away. Meanwhile, Alliance Tech Solutions wasn't faring any better. Shareholders filed a derivative lawsuit against the board for negligence, accusing them of knowingly allowing discriminatory practices to endanger the company's reputation and assets. Recruiters whispered that Alliance Tech was now radioactive, top engineers and project managers jumping ship by the dozens, unwilling to be associated with a sinking brand. Inside their corner offices, the same executives who had once offered Amari $25,000 to disappear were now watching millions evaporate overnight. And at the center of it all? Amari Benson, the man they tried to silence, the man they underestimated. He moved carefully now, advised by Carla James and a growing team of legal strategists. They filed the final federal civil rights lawsuits, one against State Trust Bank, another against Alliance Tech Solutions. Each lawsuit was built with surgical precision, every allegation backed by solid proof, every claim amplified by national outrage. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about setting a legal precedent that no corporate apology tour could erase. Amari never once raised his voice publicly, never once called for a boycott, never once stood on a podium. He let the evidence speak. He let the truth thunder. And as the corporations scrambled to negotiate settlements, grovel for reduced penalties, and beg for private arbitration, Amari Benson stood taller than ever, not because he had shouted, but because he had endured, because he had refused to be erased. And now, the final reckoning was only days away. The courtroom was silent, save for the soft clicks of reporters' pens and the hum of the ceiling fans. Amari Benson sat at the plaintiff's table, a dark gray suit sharp against the muted oak of the courtroom walls. His face was calm, unreadable, his hands folded loosely before him. Across the aisle, the corporate representatives fidgeted, suits slightly wrinkled, hairlines damp with nervous sweat. The judge's voice rang clear and steady. In the matter of Benson versus State Trust Bank and Alliance Tech Solutions, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. There was no applause, no cheers, just a sharp, ringing silence. The judge continued, his words slicing through the room. State Trust Bank is ordered to pay compensatory and punitive damages totaling $8.7 million. Alliance Tech Solutions is ordered to pay compensatory damages and issue a formal public apology, including mandated diversity and anti-retaliation reforms supervised by a federal monitor for 5 years. The sound of defeat, paper shuffling, a stifled cough, the slow collapse of corporate pride, filled the room. Amari stood slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded once at Carla James, who gave him the faintest nod back, the nod of warriors who understood victory meant something far heavier than celebrations. As Amari exited the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters called his name. He kept walking. He wasn't there for headlines. He was there for closure. Outside, the crisp air smelled sharper, cleaner. He paused on the courthouse steps, lifting his face to the sky for a moment, not in triumph, but in peace. He thought back to that humiliating afternoon at the bank, the rough hands, the burning shame, the cold marble against his face. And he realized something. They hadn't broken him. They had revealed him. Not to the world. To himself. Strength wasn't in how loud you fought. It was in how quietly you endured. How methodically you demanded accountability. How fiercely you protected your dignity, even when they tried to strip it away. He tucked his hands into his pockets and walked into the city, leaving the courthouse, the headlines, the cameras behind. A free man. Not because someone handed him justice. Because he took it. On his own terms. Without permission. Without apology. And somewhere deep inside him, where fear used to live, only one thing remained. Unshakable, unstoppable dignity. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.